My name is Bridget Morris. I am 32 years old, and 48 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my family sold my $9,000 custom wedding dress at a yard sale for a 20 and 2 tens. My sister popped a piece of gum and told me I did not deserve something that expensive anyway. My mother stood 10 feet away, rearranging ceramic mugs and refusing to look me in the eye. They expected me to break down. They expected me to panic run to a discount bridal shop and swallow the loss to protect the family name. That is the script I had followed my entire life. I did not follow the script. I did not shed a single tear. I turned around, got in my car, and made one phone call. And 2 days later, every busybody in our Charleston neighborhood stood on their front porches watching a live news crew corner my father in his own driveway. He was purple in the face, screaming at the camera lens to get off his property. The respectable Morris family illusion shattered right there on the gravel. Before I explain how a missing silk gown unraveled a decades-old network of financial theft, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I love reading your responses here on QT Told Stories. Now let me take you back to that humid Thursday afternoon in West Virginia when the war started. My parents live in a sprawling house tucked into the Appalachian Hills. My father, John, spent his life in coal logistics. He ran his house the same way he ran his dispatchers, demanding blind loyalty and silence. I only left my dress at their house for one specific reason. The master seamstress who spent 3 weeks hand-sewing my late grandmother's heirloom lace into the bodice lived directly next door. The dress was sealed in a heavy garment bag monogrammed with my wedding date. It was safe in their climate-controlled cedar closet. Or so I thought. When my tires crunched onto the gravel driveway that Thursday, I had to park on the street. Cardboard signs were stapled to the telephone poles. A neighborhood yard sale was in full swing on their front lawn. I walked up the driveway expecting to just grab my dress and head home to finalize my floral arrangements. Then I saw it. The monogrammed garment bag lay crumpled in the grass next to a cardboard box full of old VHS tapes. It was unzipped. It was empty. My younger sister Chloe sat in a folding chair, scrolling on her phone. She is 29, chronically unemployed, and the designated golden child of the family. I picked up the empty bag and asked her where my dress was. She did not even look up from her screen. Some lady bought it for $40, she said. Her voice was flat, bored. She popped a bubble. It is just a dress, Bridget. You did not deserve something that expensive anyway. My gaze shifted to the house. My mother, Susan, stood just inside the open kitchen door. She heard every word. She picked up a dish towel and wiped down a spotless counter, turning her back to me. But from where I stood, I could clearly see the kitchen island behind her. Sitting next to the fruit bowl was a thick stack of unopened county court envelopes. They were stamped with bold red ink reading, "Final Notice." I stood on the lawn, holding the empty plastic bag. The Appalachian air was thick and heavy. I realized right then that my sister did not accidentally sell a $9,000 silk gown at a yard sale. And my mother did not accidentally let it happen. I was staring at a crime scene. To truly comprehend the sheer gravity of this betrayal, you have to understand the invisible ledger my family maintained for as long as I can remember. I'm an environmental consultant. I spend my days driving out to abandoned coal reclamation sites deep in the Appalachian Mountains, assessing land, testing soil, and figuring out how to heal terrain that has been strip-mined and left for dead. It is hard, dirty, technical work, and it pays very well. My father, John, spent his entire career in coal logistics. He is a man who values hierarchy above all else. He ran his household the exact same way he ran his shipping dispatchers, with an iron fist and a demand for absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the family unit. In his mind, the family was a corporation, and he was the CEO. I was the daughter who left. I went to college, got an advanced degree, bought my own home, and built a life entirely independent of his control. Chloe, on the other hand, was the daughter who stayed. She is 29 years old, chronically unemployed, and currently resides in the finished basement of my parents' home. She is the golden child. In my family dynamic, independence was not celebrated. It was viewed as a threat. My fiancé Evan is a high school history teacher with a spine made of solid steel. Early on in our relationship, he pointed out a pattern I had been too close to see. I was not treated like a daughter, he told me one evening after a particularly grueling Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I was treated like a private ATM and an emotional shock absorber. He was right. The precedent was set long before Evan ever entered the picture. When I was 17 years old, I spent an entire summer working double shifts at a local diner, saving every penny of my tips to buy a used car. Late one August night, my parents woke me up. Chloe, who was 14 at the time, had been caught shoplifting hundreds of dollars worth of cosmetics from a department store at the mall. The store manager was threatening to press charges and involve juvenile detention unless restitution was paid immediately. My father did not go to his own bank account. He came to my bedroom. He demanded I hand over the $800 I had saved in a shoebox under my bed. When I cried and protested, my mother told me that family helps family and that I was being selfish for caring more about a car than my own sister's future. I handed over the money. That single transaction established the blueprint for the next 15 years of my life. Every time I achieved something, Chloe manufactured a crisis. When I graduated college, she totaled her car and needed my signing bonus for a down payment on a new one. When I got my first major promotion, she maxed out a credit card in my mother's name, and I was expected to clear the debt to save my parents' credit score. I was trained to shrink myself. I was conditioned to believe that my success was only valuable if it could be liquidated to subsidize Chloe's failures. My parents demanded I sacrifice my own joy to maintain the illusion of their perfect, peaceful home. Then came the wedding dress. I had never spent that kind of money on myself. $9,000 is a staggering amount, but I had saved for it specifically. I paid for it in full, directly from a separate savings account. It was a masterpiece of heavy silk, hand-sewn pearls, and most importantly, it incorporated pieces of vintage lace that had belonged to my late grandmother. My grandmother was the only person in the Morris family who ever told me I was enough just as I was. When she passed, she left that lace to me, explicitly stating it was for my wedding day. Having that lace integrated into the bodice was not just a design choice. It was a way of carrying her with me down the aisle. When my parents found out how much the dress cost, the atmosphere in their house turned frigid. My father made passive-aggressive comments about financial irresponsibility. My mother sighed heavily and mentioned how Chloe was struggling to make her car payments and how that $9,000 could have really helped her get back on her feet. I ignored them. For the first time in my life, I refused to apologize for my own happiness. I refused to feel guilty for spending my own hard-earned money on a milestone I had built for myself. I broke the unspoken family rule. I funded my own joy instead of funding Chloe's lifestyle. Standing on the lawn that Thursday afternoon, staring at the empty garment bag, the pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. This was not a careless mistake. Chloe did not accidentally toss a heavy, custom monogrammed bridal bag onto a folding table full of junk. And my mother did not accidentally fail to notice it. The yard sale was a calculated punishment. It was a systemic retaliation designed to strip me of the one thing I had bought purely for myself. They wanted to see me break. They wanted to watch me scramble, cry, and ultimately realize that I could never truly escape their control. They expected me to panic, rush out to a discount store, buy a cheap replacement, and pretend everything was fine. Because after all, family is family. They expected the old Bridget, the girl who handed over her shoebox of diner tips. But as I stood there in the humid Appalachian air, feeling the gravel shift under my shoes, a profound and icy calm washed over me. The invisible ledger snapped shut. The debt was canceled. I looked at my sister, still chewing her gum, and my mother, still pretending to clean her spotless kitchen. I did not yell. I did not demand an explanation. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward my car. The real war was about to begin. I did not scream. I did not throw my hands in the air or drop to my knees on the manicured lawn. The Appalachian summer heat pressed down on my shoulders, but my blood ran ice cold. I turned on my heel and walked away from my sister and her folding chair. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my flats. Each step felt heavy, but deliberate. I reached my sedan, opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and pressed the electronic lock button. The sharp click of the locks engaging severed the physical connection between me and the people standing on the grass outside. Inside the car, the air was stifling. I had not turned the engine on yet. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel. My knuckles turned white against the dark leather. For 29 years, my body had been conditioned to react to their disrespect with immediate panic. I was trained to figure out how to fix their mistakes, to smooth over the rough edges of their poor choices. Today, the panic never arrived. Only a profound, hollow clarity took its place. Before I could even reach for the ignition, my cell phone began to ring inside my purse. The screen illuminated the dim interior of the car. The caller ID displayed my father's name, John Morris. I stared at the glowing letters. In the past, I would have answered on the first ring, eager to plead my case, hoping he would finally see my side and defend me. I picked up the device and pressed accept, bringing the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened. "Bridget, get out of that car and come back inside right now to stop making a scene," his voice barked through the receiver. He did not ask what happened. He issued a directive. My father spent his entire adult life directing coal shipments across the state lines of West Virginia. He viewed every family conflict as a logistical error that required an immediate, forceful correction. In his mind, I was a subordinate employee disrupting the daily operations of his household. "Your sister made a mistake," he continued, his tone hardening with that familiar, authoritative edge. "She thought it was an old prom dress you left in the closet. You know how cluttered it gets in there." I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. My custom garment bag was opaque black, waterproof canvas. Across the front, the bridal boutique had embroidered my name and my wedding date in bright silver thread. Inside the bag, the gown was wrapped in layers of protective, acid-free tissue paper. No rational human being could mistake a heavy $9,000 silk bridal gown secured in a monogrammed bag for a discarded teenage prom dress. He knew it was a lie. Chloe knew it was a lie. But in the Morris family, truth was fluid. Truth was whatever narrative my father decided to enforce to protect his golden child from accountability. I remained silent. My lack of verbal compliance frustrated him. I heard a muffled exchange on the other end of the line. The phone shuffled, and then my mother's voice filled the quiet space of my car. "Honey, please be the bigger person," Susan pleaded. Her voice dripped with a highly practiced, weaponized guilt. It was the same tone she used at her country club luncheons when discussing a minor inconvenience. She possessed a terrifying ability to minimize catastrophic betrayals into trivial misunderstandings. "Chloe is really struggling right now with her mental health, Bridget," my mother sighed. "She needed some pocket money to get through the week. It was just a silly mix-up. Do not ruin your beautiful wedding weekend over a piece of fabric." A piece of fabric. She reduced the heirloom lace worn by my grandmother, the woman who actually showed me unconditional love, to a disposable scrap of material. My mother expected me to absorb the blow, just as I had done 1,000 times before. She anticipated the usual routine. She waited for me to cry, to argue briefly, and then to inevitably surrender. They expected me to drive away in tears and head straight to a generic bridal outlet. They assumed I would purchase a cheap white dress off the rack, swallow the bitter taste of humiliation, and stand at the altar in 2 days pretending everything was perfect. They needed me to play the role of the compliant daughter so they could play the roles of the generous, loving parents in front of our extended family and their affluent friends. If I capitulated, their social standing remained pristine. If I fought back, I became the hysterical bride ruining a family celebration over materialistic greed. They had constructed a flawless psychological trap. I sat in my sweltering car analyzing the architecture of their manipulation. My mother continued to talk, filling the silence with empty platitudes about forgiveness and family bonds. I realized then that the woman who had spent nearly 3 decades acting as their designated emotional sponge was dead. She died right there on that hot gravel driveway. I lowered the phone from my ear. I did not utter a single word in response to her guilt trip. I did not offer a defense or a counter-argument. I simply pressed the red button and ended the call. I placed the phone in the passenger seat. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and the air conditioning blasted against my face. I shifted the sedan into drive. I did not look back at the house, or the yard sale tables, or my sister sitting in her folding chair. I pressed my foot against the accelerator and drove down the mountain road toward the city of Charleston. As the winding Appalachian roads blurred past my windows, I made a conscious decision. I initiated a psychological tactic known as the gray rock method. The premise is simple. When dealing with manipulative individuals, you do not provide them with any emotional reaction. You become as uninteresting, unmoving, and unresponsive as a gray rock. You offer no anger, no sadness, no explanations. You starve them of the emotional fuel they need to maintain their control. My parents and my sister thrived on my reactions. My tears validated their power. My arguments gave them a stage to play the victims. By hanging up the phone and driving away in total silence, I severed their power supply. My phone began to buzz relentlessly on the passenger seat. Text messages flooded the screen in rapid succession. My father demanded I return. My mother sent long paragraphs about my supposed selfishness. 2 of my aunts, who had clearly already received the distorted version of the story, texted me to say I was acting like an entitled bridezilla. I ignored every single notification. My mind shifted from emotional devastation to cold, calculating logistics. I knew my sister. Chloe was lazy, but she was not distant when it came to securing her own comfort. She possessed a champagne taste on a tap water budget. She would never sell a heavy, intricate silk gown for a $20 bill and 2 tens to a random neighbor. The $40 yard sale story was a poorly constructed facade. The dress was not gone. It was converted into a much larger sum of cash somewhere else. The yard sale was merely the stage play enacted to give them plausible deniability. I needed to find out where the real transaction took place. I navigated the interstate, heading toward the home I shared with Evan. My fiancé was the safe harbor in the storm of my life. I knew he would not offer me empty comfort. He would offer me a strategy. But I also knew I needed a very specific type of reinforcements to uncover the truth behind my sister's theft. I needed someone who understood how to extract information from reluctant sources. I needed someone who could see through the polite, southern-fried manipulation of the Charleston elite. I needed to make a phone call to the one person who terrified my parents more than anyone else on earth. I needed Evan's sister. The drive back to the city limits of Charleston felt like crossing a psychological border. As I navigated the winding, descending roads of the Appalachian foothills, leaving my parents' sprawling property behind, the crushing humidity of their expectations seemed to evaporate. I kept the radio off. The silence inside my sedan was a necessary vacuum. I needed space to process the sheer scale of the deception. By the time I pulled into the driveway of the modest craftsman home I shared with Evan, my pulse had slowed to a steady, methodical rhythm. I unlocked the front door and stepped into our foyer. The house smelled faintly of roasted coffee and the cedar wood of the original flooring. It was a sanctuary we had purchased together, built on equal partnership and mutual respect. Evan was sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by stacks of high school history essays. He wore his reading glasses pushed low on his nose, a red pen loosely gripped in his right hand. He looked up when the door clicked shut. He did not need me to say a word. He read the shift in my posture and the hard set of my jaw instantly. He put the pen down and pushed the essays aside. Evan possessed an incredible capacity to read human behavior. As a history teacher, he understood the mechanics of conflict, the escalation of hostilities, and the tactics of entrenched regimes. He knew my family operated like a corrupt, localized government. When I detailed the empty garment bag, the yard sale, the chewing gum, and the brazen lies manufactured on my parents' front lawn, Evan did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me that everything happens for a reason, or that we could somehow salvage the afternoon. He stood up, walked over to the coffee maker, and poured 2 black cups. He handed one to me, pulled a yellow legal pad from a drawer, and sat back down at the island. "What is the plan?" he asked. His voice was level, grounding me in reality. Before I could answer, my cell phone began to vibrate across the quartz countertop. The screen illuminated, displaying a rapid succession of text messages. The flying monkeys had been deployed. In any dysfunctional family dynamic, when the primary controllers fail to extract a reaction, they send in proxies to do their dirty work. My father's sisters, Aunt Carol and Aunt Diane, were executing their assigned roles perfectly. Aunt Carol texted me to ask why I was acting like a spoiled brat on a Thursday afternoon. Aunt Diane sent a lengthy paragraph accusing me of turning into a bridezilla and demanding I return to apologize to my mother, who was apparently weeping in the kitchen. They had received a highly sanitized, fictionalized version of events where I had thrown a tantrum over a simple closet-cleaning misunderstanding. I watched the screen light up over and over again. The Grey Rock method requires discipline. The urge to defend yourself, to type out paragraphs of evidence and hurl the truth back at your accusers is nearly overwhelming. But responding provides them with ammunition. It gives them a new reaction to dissect and twist. I picked up the phone, swiped the notification banner away, and turned the device face down. I starved their fire of oxygen. "We need a hunter," I told Evan, sliding onto the bar stool across from him. "We need your sister." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Evan's face. He nodded and pushed his phone toward me. Maya is a 30-year-old powerhouse. She is an African-American investigative producer for the most prominent local television news station in our region. She spends her weeks exposing corrupt city council members, uncovering fraudulent contracting schemes, and holding the powerful accountable on camera. Maya possessed a terrifying intellect and an innate immunity to the polite Southern manipulation that governed my parents' social circles. She saw through fake smiles and passive-aggressive pleasantries with lethal precision. I dialed her number. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert amid the background hum of a busy newsroom. I laid out the timeline of events with clinical detachment. I explained the $9,000 dress, the exact location of the yard sale, the $40 cover story, and my parents' coordinated defense of my sister. Maya let out a low whistle that crackled through the speakerphone. $40 for custom silk, she said, her producer instincts instantly activating. Please. Your sister has champagne taste and a tap water budget. She did not sell a designer gown to Mrs. Higgins down the street for pocket change. She fenced it. Maya asked for the designer's name, the exact description of the garment bag, and the time window of the supposed yard sale. While my relatives were busy coordinating a smear campaign against my character in their group chats, Maya was tapping into a vast network of local sources. She understood immediately that this was not a story about a stressed bride crying over tulle. This was a high-value theft disguised as family dysfunction. "Give me 1 hour," Maya promised, her voice dropping into a register of pure tactical focus. "I am going to track the movement of your dress, and then we are going to set a trap." She hung up, leaving Evan and me in the quiet kitchen. The waiting period stretched the tension tight across the room. Evan began mapping out a timeline on his legal pad, noting the time I arrived at the house, the time the yard sale supposedly started, and the geographical radius of nearby towns. We were treating my childhood home like a hostile territory, and my immediate blood relatives like hostile actors. The realization should have broken my heart, but the betrayal had burned away any lingering affection. 54 minutes later, the phone rang. Evan put it on speaker. "I found the buyer," Maya announced triumphantly. She did not bother with pleasantries. I utilized a neighborhood watch application and cross-referenced a few social media posts from your parents' street. A woman named Sheila, who lives 3 doors down, posted a photo of her yard sale haul an hour ago. I just got off the phone with her. My breath caught in my throat. "Does she have the dress?" I asked. Maya paused, letting the silence build for a fraction of a second. She has a dress, Maya corrected. Sheila confirmed she walked up to the folding table this morning. She confirmed she handed your sister a $20 bill and 2 tens. The transaction happened exactly as Chloe described it. I felt a sudden disorienting wave of confusion. So Chloe told the truth, I asked, my voice wavering. She really sold my wedding gown for $40? No, Maya replied, her tone turning sharp as shattered glass. I asked Sheila to describe the garment. She sent me a picture of it draped over her dining room chair. Sheila bought an outdated, heavily sequined, hot pink high school prom dress, manufactured circa 2014. The air rushed out of my lungs. Evan stopped writing on his legal pad. The implications of Maya's discovery hit me with the force of a physical blow. The yard sale was a red herring. It was a theatrical diversion staged specifically for an audience. Chloe knew I would come looking for the gown. She needed a plausible narrative to explain its sudden disappearance from the cedar closet. So she dragged a folding table onto the lawn, tossed out some old videotapes, threw an empty, monogrammed garment bag on the grass, and sold her own discarded teenage formal wear to a nosy neighbor, just to create a paper trail of a $40 transaction. The bridal gown was never on that table. The empty bag was a prop. If the dress was not sold at the yard sale, then the $40 story was entirely fabricated to hide a much larger payout. Chloe had meticulously loaded my custom wedding gown into her vehicle, driven away from the neighborhood, and fenced it to a high-end buyer. The chill that settled over my skin had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My sister had orchestrated a premeditated felony heist right under my parents' roof, and my mother had stood in the kitchen covering for her. But high-end consignment shops and pawnbrokers do not pay out thousands of dollars without a rigorous authentication process. Chloe had to have planned this days in advance. And more importantly, fencing a stolen item of that magnitude carries a massive legal risk. A person only takes that kind of desperate, reckless gamble when they need a very specific sum of untraceable cash immediately. I looked across the kitchen island at Evan. The question hung in the space between us. Why did my unemployed sister need thousands of dollars in physical cash exactly 48 hours before I walked down the aisle? The revelation that the yard sale was a complete fabrication fundamentally altered the stakes of the afternoon. We were no longer dealing with a careless sister trying to make pocket change. We were dealing with a calculated, premeditated felony. Maya ended the call with the neighbor and immediately shifted her focus to a more systematic approach. She opened her laptop and began compiling a digital list of every legitimate bridal consignment shop, vintage clothing broker, and high-end pawnbroker within a 50-mile radius of Charleston. The investigation, however, quickly hit a formidable wall. Maya spent the next 2 hours dialing numbers, utilizing her most persuasive journalistic tone, pretending to be an event planner, searching for a specific canceled engagement dress. Shop owner after shop owner gave her the same negative response. No one had seen a custom silk gown matching my description. No young blonde woman had walked through their doors demanding a cash buyout. The tension in our living room thickened, turning the air stale. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the cedar floors. Every dead-end call felt like another grain of sand slipping through an hourglass. I only had 48 hours until the ceremony, and without the dress, the entire weekend felt untethered. "We are looking at this backwards," Evan said, leaning over the kitchen island and tapping his pen against the legal pad. "We are focusing on the item instead of the motive." He was entirely correct. In any historical conflict, understanding the underlying financial motivation often reveals the strategy of the opponent. "Think about it," Evan continued. "Your sister is lazy. Fencing a highly recognizable designer gown is incredibly risky and requires a massive amount of effort. She had to transport it, negotiate a price, and risk getting caught with stolen property. A person only takes that kind of reckless, desperate gamble when they are backed into a corner, when they need a very specific sum of untraceable cash immediately." Why did Chloe need thousands of dollars in physical cash exactly 2 days before my wedding? The question hung in the quiet house, demanding an answer. My mind flashed back to the scene in my parents' driveway. I pictured my mother standing in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. I visualized the stack of envelopes sitting next to the fruit bowl. The bold red ink stamped across the paper burned into my memory. Final notice. "I need my laptop," I said, standing up so quickly my bar stool scraped against the floor. My career as an environmental consultant involves far more than hiking through the Appalachian Mountains testing soil samples. A significant portion of my job requires navigating complex county property records, unearthing buried land deeds, and tracking down corporate ownership histories through the state's convoluted public databases. I possessed a very specific set of digital investigative skills that my family severely underestimated. I retrieved my computer from my home office, brought it out to the kitchen island, and logged onto the West Virginia State Public Court portal. The system is antiquated, clunky, and notoriously difficult for the general public to search effectively. But I knew exactly which drop-down menus to bypass and which county dockets to target. I typed my sister's full legal name into the search bar, Chloe Elizabeth Morris. The system buffered for a few agonizing seconds, a spinning wheel mocking the urgency of the moment. Then the screen populated with a list of results. My sister had a surprisingly robust digital footprint within the local municipal court system. There were several minor traffic violations, a few dismissed noise complaints, and the lingering unpaid parking ticket from 3 years ago. I bypassed the older entries and filtered the search results to only show active, open cases filed within the last 6 months. A single entry remained highlighted in stark digital blue. I clicked the link, expanding the case details. The information displayed on the screen confirmed every dark suspicion I harbored. "Bingo," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Evan and Maya moved to stand behind my chair, their eyes scanning the legal jargon populating the monitor. 3 months ago, Chloe was involved in a hit-and-run incident in a neighboring county. According to the police report, she rear-ended a parked delivery vehicle late at night and fled the scene. Because she was driving on a suspended license and operating a vehicle without mandatory state insurance, she was facing severe legal consequences. The presiding judge had shown her leniency, granting a deferred sentence on the condition that she pay full restitution for the property damage caused to the delivery vehicle. The court order mandated a lump sum payment to the victim. I dragged my cursor over the financial judgment section of the docket, highlighting the exact monetary figure: $2,500. The payment deadline was listed in bold typography directly beneath the sum. The restitution was due in full to the county clerk's office by 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Tomorrow. If the payment was not received by the deadline, the deferred sentence would be automatically revoked. Her suspended license charge would upgrade to a criminal violation, resulting in an immediate bench warrant for her arrest. Chloe would spend my wedding weekend sitting in a holding cell at the county jail. The entire chaotic puzzle snapped into sharp, brutal focus. The stakes were not about a jealous sister trying to ruin a wedding. The stakes were about a desperate criminal trying to buy her own freedom. My parents knew about the court order. Those final notice envelopes on the kitchen counter were the physical manifestation of the impending deadline. John and Susan had exhausted their liquid savings bailing Chloe out of her previous financial disasters. They did not have $2,500 in cash readily available to cover this restitution. They were staring down the barrel of a public scandal. Their golden child was 24 hours away from being arrested. They panicked. They needed a high-value asset they could liquidate instantly without a paper trail. And my $9,000 custom silk bridal gown was sitting undefended in their cedar closet. They did not just allow my sister to steal my dress. They actively facilitated the theft. They orchestrated the fake yard sale to provide a plausible cover story. They planned to sacrifice the joy and dignity of my wedding day to keep their unemployed daughter out of a jail cell. They expected me to absorb the financial loss and the emotional devastation silently, because in the Morris family, keeping up appearances was the only currency that mattered. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously executed, that it transcended anger. It entered a realm of cold, strategic calculation. We have the motive, Maya said, breaking the silence, her voice vibrating with a new, intense energy. "We know exactly how much cash she needed. Now we just have to figure out who handed her the money." Maya closed her laptop. "Legitimate consignment shops are a dead end," she stated, pacing the length of our kitchen. "No respectable boutique owner in Charleston is handing a walk-in stranger $2.5 grand in physical cash on a Thursday morning without a receipt of original purchase or extensive identification checks. It is too risky." "So where did she go?" Evan asked. Maya stops pacing, a sharp, predatory grin spreading across her face. "She went somewhere dirty. She went to a buyer who does not ask questions about provenance. She went to a shady liquidator or a high-end pawnbroker who buys distressed inventory for pennies on the dollar and resells it out of state." Maya pulled out her phone, navigating away from her neat list of legitimate bridal shops. She began typing furiously into a search engine, altering her keywords. She was no longer looking for bridal boutiques. She was looking for asset liquidators, estate buyers, and independent pawn shops located in the neighboring county where the hit and run occurred. "Chloe had to cross county lines to fence the dress," I noted, pointing at the court docket, still glowing on my screen. "The restitution payment has to be delivered to the clerk's office in Morgantown. She would have driven there today to secure the cash and make the payment in one trip." Maya nodded, dialing a new number. "You two stay quiet," she instructed, bringing the phone to her ear. "I am going to play a very different kind of character this time." The investigation had pivoted. We were no longer searching for a missing dress. We were hunting a fenced asset. And my family had no idea that their carefully constructed timeline was rapidly collapsing. Armed with the exact financial figure my sister needed, Maya completely abandoned her polite event planner persona. She shifted her strategy from targeting legitimate bridal boutiques to hunting down the underbelly of the local consignment world. She bypassed any shop with a pristine storefront or a manicured online presence in Charleston. Instead, she focused her search entirely on the neighboring county where the court restitution was due. She sought out shady pawnbrokers, distressed inventory liquidators, and cash-for-clothes warehouses, operations that thrived on desperate sellers and asked very few questions about the origins of high-end merchandise. The atmosphere in our kitchen crackled with a new predatory energy. Maya paced the length of the room, holding her phone to her ear, her voice dropping an octave, assuming the authoritative cadence she used when cornering corrupt politicians on camera. She dialed number after number, cross-referencing business listings with the route Chloe would have taken to the county courthouse. After 45 minutes of dead ends and hostile hang-ups, Maya hit a solid lead. She had called a warehouse liquidator located just off the interstate a few miles from the Morgantown Municipal Building. The establishment marketed itself as an estate buyout specialist, but public records indicated a history of receiving citations for failing to maintain proper seller documentation. I watched Maya's posture stiffen. She stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, her eyes locking onto mine. "Yes, I am looking for a very specific garment," Maya said, her tone sharp and uncompromising. "A custom silk bridal gown dropped off this morning by a blonde woman in her late 20s claiming a canceled engagement. I know she walked out with exactly $2,500 in cash." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Maya put the call on speakerphone so Evan and I could hear the muffled, defensive response of the broker. "Look, lady," the man stammered, his voice gruff and evasive. "I see 100 dresses a week. I cannot confirm every sob story that walks through my door. I run a legitimate business here. Even if I did buy something like that, all sales are final, and the inventory is already being processed for out-of-state shipping." The broker was playing dumb. He recognized the description immediately. But he also recognized the danger in admitting he possessed the item. He knew he had purchased a high-value asset for a fraction of its worth from a highly motivated seller. In the liquidation business, that usually meant the item was stolen property. By refusing to confirm he still had the dress, he was attempting to protect his illegal investment and sever his liability. He was trying to stonewall us. He assumed we were just angry family members trying to reverse a bad transaction. He did not realize he was negotiating with a seasoned investigative journalist and an environmental consultant who specialized in uncovering buried liabilities. Evan rubbed his temples, analyzing the stalemate. "We need leverage," he whispered, leaning close to the phone. "He is not going to surrender a $9,000 asset just because we ask nicely. He needs to believe holding on to it is more dangerous than giving it up." I stared at the speakerphone, my mind racing through every detail of the dress. I thought about the heavy silk, the pearl embellishments, and the intricate design. And then a specific memory surfaced, breaking through the chaotic haze of the afternoon. I thought about my grandmother. When my grandmother passed away, she did not just leave me a box of old fabric. She left me a highly valuable piece of antique Belgian lace. Because she understood the financial value of the heirloom, she had it professionally appraised and insured decades ago. When I took the lace to the master seamstress to be integrated into the bodice of my wedding gown, the seamstress insisted on implementing a security measure. I grabbed a pen from the island and frantically scribbled a note on Evan's yellow legal pad, sliding it across the counter to Maya. "Tell him about the jeweler tag," I wrote, tapping the paper emphatically. Maya raised an eyebrow, silently asking for clarification, while the broker continued to ramble on the speakerphone about his strict privacy policies. When the seamstress attached the heirloom lace, I whispered rapidly I had her sew a microscopic registered jeweler tag directly into the inner lining of the bodice. It contains a unique appraisal serial number tied directly to my name and my insurance policy. The dress is not just a piece of clothing. It contains registered, traceable, antique property. Maya's eyes widened. She understood the magnitude of the weapon I had just handed her. She cleared her throat, cutting the broker off mid-sentence. "Listen to me very carefully, sir," Maya commanded, her voice dropping into a register of absolute authority. "We are not calling to ask for a refund. We are calling to inform you that you are currently in possession of registered stolen property." The broker scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You cannot prove that." "I do not have to prove it to you," Maya shot back. "I will prove it to the federal authorities. The lace integrated into the bodice of that gown contains a microscopic jeweler tag with a registered appraisal serial number. That serial number is linked directly to an active insurance policy under my client's name." The line went dead silent. "If you attempt to resell that dress, transport it across state lines, or alter it in any way, you are no longer dealing with a simple local theft." Maya continued driving the nail into the coffin. "You will be facing federal charges for the transport and sale of stolen, registered heirlooms. I am an investigative producer for the local news affiliate, and I am currently staring at the police report we are about to file, naming your establishment as the fence for a felony heist." The silence stretched, the tension pulling tight across the kitchen. The broker was rapidly calculating his exposure. He had gambled $2,500 on a quick flip. He suddenly realized that gamble could cost him his business license and land him in federal prison. "You have two choices," Maya said, offering him a brutal ultimatum. "You can continue to play dumb, and I will have a camera crew and a squad car in your parking lot within the hour. Or you can confirm you have the dress, lock it in your safe, and cooperate when law enforcement arrives to reclaim it." I heard a heavy, ragged sigh echo through the speaker. The tough guy facade crumbled completely. "Fine," the broker muttered, his voice tight with defeated frustration. "I have the dress." The blonde girl brought it in right when I opened. She was practically shaking, demanding cash. I gave her the $2,500 and she ran out the door. It is hanging in the back office. Relief washed over me so intensely, my knees felt weak. Evan placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. We had found it. The dress was intact, and more importantly, we had extracted a recorded verbal confession from the man who facilitated the transaction. "I will secure it," the broker added hastily, clearly desperate to mitigate his legal jeopardy. "Just keep the cameras away from my storefront. I do not need that kind of heat." "Do not touch the garment," Maya instructed. "The local authorities will be contacting you shortly." Maya ended the call and tossed her phone onto the kitchen island. A fierce, triumphant silence settled over the room. We had dismantled the $40 yard sale lie, uncovered the financial motive, and located the stolen asset in a matter of hours. My sister had successfully fenced the gown to pay her court restitution, but her victory was incredibly short-lived. The emotional smokescreen my parents had tried to deploy, the guilt trips, the accusations of selfishness, the demands for family unity, had fully evaporated. We were no longer navigating a messy family dispute over a misplaced item. We had concrete proof of a coordinated felony theft orchestrated to protect a criminal. I looked at Evan and Maya. The initial shock of the betrayal had been replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. My family had expected me to fold. They assumed I would be too devastated to investigate and too loyal to involve the law. They severely underestimated the woman they had spent 29 years trying to control. I reached for my purse and pulled out my car keys. "Where are we going?" Evan asked, already grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair. I looked down at the legal pad where Evan had meticulously charted the timeline of my family's crimes. I picked up the pen and drew a thick, dark line through my sister's name. "We are going to the police precinct," I stated, my voice perfectly steady. "It is time to set the trap." The drive from our quiet Craftsman home to the municipal precinct took precisely 14 minutes. During that brief transit, the lingering fog of emotional manipulation evaporated from my mind, leaving behind a sterile, surgical clarity. For my entire life, my relatives utilized a thick smokescreen of guilt to obscure their transgressions. They weaponized the concept of loyalty, demanding silent endurance in exchange for conditional approval. Sitting in the passenger seat of our sedan, watching the rugged Appalachian foothills roll past the window, I realized their greatest weapon was no longer effective. They had not merely been careless with my feelings. They orchestrated a felony to protect a criminal and expected me to act as their willing accomplice. Evan navigated the winding roads with steady precision, keeping his hands positioned at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He did not attempt to fill the quiet space with unnecessary conversation. He understood that I was currently transitioning between two distinct phases of existence. The old Bridget would have spent this car ride hyperventilating, drafting conciliatory text messages, and desperately searching for a way to absorb the financial blow so everyone else could remain comfortable. The new Bridget sat perfectly still, a thick manila folder resting squarely on her lap, containing the blueprints of their destruction. We pulled into the visitor parking lot of the police station. The building was a brutalist structure of concrete and reinforced glass, sitting in stark contrast to the historical architecture of downtown Charleston. The fading evening sunlight reflected off the rows of parked patrol cruisers. I unbuckled my seatbelt, stepped out onto the asphalt, and inhaled the cool mountain air. Maya was waiting for us near the entrance, leaning against the hood of her vehicle. As an investigative producer, she understood the delicate nature of filing a formal complaint. She opted to remain outside, maintaining a professional distance from the official law enforcement proceedings, while she coordinated the next phase of our strategy with her news director. She gave me a sharp, affirming nod as Evan and I walked through the heavy glass double doors. The interior of the precinct smelled of industrial bleach and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the scuffed linoleum floor. We approached the front desk and requested to speak with an investigator regarding grand larceny and the interstate fencing of stolen property. The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow at the specific legal terminology, but directed us toward a small, austere interview room down a narrow hallway. A few moments later, a seasoned investigator entered the room. He introduced himself as Detective Caldwell, a man with graying temples and the weary demeanor of someone accustomed to untangling petty domestic squabbles. He sat across from us at the scarred metal table, opening a blank notepad. When I initially stated that my wedding gown had been stolen, his posture relaxed into a posture of distinct skepticism. Law enforcement officials frequently deal with high-stress bridal disputes, petty bridal party arguments, and exaggerated claims of missing property. He likely assumed I was a distressed bride seeking a uniformed mediator for a trivial family spat. I did not offer him a dramatic narrative. I did not shed a single tear or raise the pitch of my voice. Drawing upon my professional experience as an environmental consultant, where I routinely present complex land use violations to hostile corporate boards, I opened the manila folder and began laying out the evidence in sequential chronological order. First, I handed him the original bank statements displaying the direct transfer of funds from my personal savings account to the bridal boutique establishing sole financial ownership. Next, I produced the detailed custom design sketches highlighting the unique pearl embellishments and the specific cut of the silk. Detective Caldwell picked up his pen, his skepticism beginning to wane as he examined the documentation. Then I presented the most critical piece of the puzzle. I slid a certified insurance appraisal across the metal table. I explained that the garment was not simply a piece of modern clothing, but a vessel for registered antique property. I detailed the vintage Belgian lace inherited from my late grandmother and pointed to the highlighted section of the appraisal, noting the microscopic jeweler tag sewn into the inner lining. I provided the exact serial number tied to that tag, transforming the item from a missing dress into a highly traceable stolen asset. The investigator's demeanor shifted entirely. The weary bureaucrat vanished, replaced by an engaged law enforcement officer, staring at a documented paper trail of high-value theft. To conclude the presentation, Evan placed his smartphone on the table and pressed play. The recorded audio of the warehouse liquidator filled the small interview room. The broker clearly admitted to purchasing the item from a blonde woman that exact morning, exchanging the goods for a specific sum of untraceable physical currency. The recording verified the location of the fenced property and confirmed the illegal transaction had already crossed county lines. Detective Caldwell paused the recording and looked directly at me. His gaze was sharp, assessing the cold resolve in my posture. "You understand that by moving forward with this, we have to establish a primary suspect," he stated, his voice low and serious. Given the timeline and the location of the initial disappearance, who had direct access to the item? There was no hesitation. I did not feel a sudden urge to protect her. I did not hear my mother's voice whispering about grace or forgiveness in the back of my mind. I looked the investigator in the eye and delivered the fatal blow to my parents' carefully curated illusion. "My sister," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Her legal name is Chloe Elizabeth Morris. She resides at the address where the theft occurred. She faces a mandatory court restitution deadline tomorrow afternoon in the exact municipality where the property was fenced." Caldwell wrote the name down, pressing the tip of his pen firmly into the paper. He recognized the irrefutable logic of the motive matching the timeline of the crime. I signed the sworn statement verifying the accuracy of my claims under penalty of perjury. I officially initiated a grand larceny charge against my own blood. The investigator immediately stood up and walked to a wall-mounted telephone. The jurisdiction of the theft occurred in Charleston, but the stolen asset was currently sitting in a warehouse in Morgantown. Caldwell contacted the neighboring precinct, dispatching a patrol unit directly to the liquidator's address. He instructed the responding officers to execute a formal legal hold on the garment, freezing the broker's ability to sell, move, or alter the evidence. The asset was officially secured by the state. Evan and I walked out of the precinct, a profound sense of liberation settling over my shoulders. The sun had dipped below the Appalachian ridgeline, plunging the city into a deep twilight. We navigated across the parking lot toward Maya's vehicle. She pushed herself off the hood of her car, her eyes glittering in the glow of the streetlights. "You filed it?" she asked. I nodded. "The hold is placed. The local authorities are securing it right now." Maya smiled a brilliant, dangerous smile that showcased her predatory brilliance. She crossed her arms, leaning forward slightly. "We secured the asset legally," she said, her tone dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "But legal consequences take months to navigate through the court system. We need something faster. We need something immediate." She turned her gaze toward me, studying my reaction. "Your father spent his entire career in coal logistics, right?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "And in that industry, deals are made on golf courses. Reputations are built on perceived stability." He cares about his standing at the local country club more than anything else in this world, does he not? He cares about his social standing more than he cares about his own children. I confirmed the bitter truth, tasting like ash in my mouth. His entire identity is tied to projecting an image of total authority and untouchable wealth to his peers. Perfect, Maya said, her smile widening into something genuinely lethal. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek, digital audio recorder. My station is running a special investigative segment tomorrow on the midday broadcast. We are covering the sudden rise of local consignment fraud and the illegal fencing of stolen goods across county lines. She tapped the recorder against her palm, the metallic click echoing in the quiet parking lot. I think I just found my lead story, and I think it requires a live on-site interview with the property owners where the theft originated. The trap was fully set. My family believed they had successfully hidden their crime behind closed doors. They had no idea that tomorrow morning, the entire state was going to watch them burn on live television. The drive back to our Craftsman home from the municipal precinct was shrouded in the early evening twilight. The Appalachian ridgelines faded into dark silhouettes against the darkening sky. Inside the car, the atmosphere had shifted from investigative urgency to tactical execution. We had secured the stolen asset and initiated the criminal proceedings. Now I needed to sever the remaining financial ties tethering me to my parents' control. My father, John, treated his social standing as his most valuable currency. His entire public identity was anchored to his membership at the most prestigious country club in Charleston. For decades, he held court in the men's grill, conducting coal logistics business over expensive scotch, and projecting an image of untouchable prosperity. Because we were originally planning to host our rehearsal dinner in the club's private dining room, his platinum credit card was on file for the final deposit. He intended to use that dinner as a stage. He wanted to stand before our extended relatives and Evan's family, playing the role of the generous patriarch. I refused to let him host a performance funded by the same hands that facilitated the theft of my wedding gown. As soon as we walked through the front door of our house, I retrieved my laptop and found the contact number for the country club event coordinator. I did not consult Evan or Maya. I simply dialed the number. When the coordinator answered, I kept my voice polite and professional. I informed her that due to an unforeseen family emergency, the Morris party was canceling the reservation for Friday evening. The coordinator expressed immediate concern, noting that canceling within 24 hours incurred a significant penalty fee against the card on file. I told her to process the penalty directly to my father's account and send him the receipt. Before she could ask any further questions, I ended the call. I spent the next 20 minutes contacting a highly rated upscale restaurant in downtown Charleston. I booked their private terrace, paid the required deposit from my own checking account, and successfully relocated the rehearsal dinner. I effectively stripped my father of his stage, his audience, and his financial leverage over my wedding weekend. I knew the retaliation would be swift. Country club management does not simply charge a penalty fee to a prominent member without offering a courtesy notification. The event coordinator undoubtedly contacted my father to clear up the billing situation. Less than 10 minutes after I finalized the new restaurant reservation, my cell phone illuminated on the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Evan and Maya stood on the opposite side of the counter, watching the device vibrate against the quartz surface. I did not pick it up immediately. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the tension to stretch before pressing the green accept icon and tapping the speaker button. I did not offer a greeting. I just listened to the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "What the hell is going on, Bridget?" my father bellowed, his voice clipping the audio speaker. "The club manager just called me. She said you canceled the dinner reservation. Why are you not answering your mother?" I kept my vocal tone perfectly flat, stripping it of any daughterly affection or fear. "I canceled the reservation because you and Susan are no longer invited to the rehearsal dinner," I stated. "Furthermore, you are officially uninvited from the wedding ceremony on Saturday." He scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound born of pure arrogance. He attempted to exert his usual dominance, treating me like a subordinate employee stepping out of line. "You are acting like a spoiled child," he snapped. "I will not have my reputation dragged through the mud because you are throwing a temper tantrum over a misplaced piece of clothing. You will call the club back and fix this right now." I did not raise my voice. I leaned closer to the phone. "It is not a misplaced piece of clothing, Dad," I replied. "It is an item of stolen property, and it is currently sitting in a police evidence locker." The line went dead silent. The total absence of sound was heavier than any screaming match could ever be. Detective Caldwell dispatched a patrol unit to the warehouse liquidator in Morgantown 40 minutes ago. I continued delivering the facts with clinical precision. We tracked the fence. We provided the jeweler tag serial number to the authorities. They placed a legal hold on the gown, and I signed a sworn statement naming Chloe as the primary suspect in a grand larceny investigation. You should probably secure legal counsel for her. The reality of the police involvement paralyzed him. The fake yard sale narrative he and my mother so carefully constructed was dead. He realized I had bypassed their emotional manipulation and utilized the justice system to expose their crime. The anger in his voice vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, creeping panic. When narcissistic controllers lose their grip on a situation, they inevitably resort to their most powerful weapon. For my father, that weapon was generational wealth. "If you do this, you are out of this family," he hissed, his voice trembling with a new, desperate rage. "Drop the charges immediately, Bridget. If you do not call the police and fix this tonight, I am cutting you out of the family land trust. You will be dead to us." It was the ultimate Appalachian threat. In West Virginia, wealthy families often consolidate their generational land holdings into trusts. These legal entities govern mineral rights, coal extraction royalties, and timber dividends. My grandfather established a lucrative trust decades ago, naming his children and grandchildren as beneficiaries. My father controlled the disbursement of those funds, acting as the sole managing trustee. He believed threatening my financial future would force me to heal. He expected the fear of losing generational wealth to break my resolve and secure my compliance. He did not realize he was walking blindly into a trap of pristine, dramatic irony. I let out a low, quiet laugh. The sound echoed in the kitchen, confusing him. The Grey Rock method had evolved into a strategic checkmate. My career as an environmental consultant involves far more than testing soil acidity on abandoned hillsides. We trace land ownership, examine royalty disbursements, and verify trust management records to ensure corporate compliance with state regulations. 3 years prior to this phone call, I conducted a routine background evaluation on a parcel of land tied to our family name. During that routine assessment, I uncovered a series of erratic financial transfers. The irregularities prompted me to dig much deeper. I utilized my professional access to run a full forensic audit on the trust accounts. I discovered my father had been quietly skimming dividends from the trust principal for years. He diverted the funds to cover my sister's mounting credit card debts, her legal fees from previous traffic violations, and her general living expenses. He treated the generational wealth meant for all beneficiaries as a personal slush fund to protect his golden child. I printed the ledger detailing every illegal transfer, placed the documents in a fireproof lockbox, and never mentioned it. I saved the information, knowing a day would come when I needed an impenetrable shield. "Dad," I said, my voice echoing with quiet authority, "you operate as a manager, not an owner. You do not have the unilateral power to remove a named beneficiary without a judge issuing a formal decree." I heard a sharp exhale on his end of the line. "And if you attempt to alter my status," I continued, "I will be forced to explain why. I am an environmental consultant. I reviewed the financial architecture of that exact land trust 3 years ago. I have a printed forensic ledger sitting in a safe that details exactly how much money you embezzled from the principal to pay for Chloe's previous legal messes." He gasped. It was a small, pathetic sound. He knew I possessed the skills to find the money, but he never imagined I would actually audit my own blood. "Keep your dividends, Dad," I stated, delivering the final blow. "Use the money for Chloe's bail. because if you try to retaliate against me, I will hand that forensic ledger directly to federal regulators, and you can explain the missing coal royalties to a judge." The power dynamic did not just shift, it shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He had no counter-argument. He had no leverage left to pull. I reached out and tapped the red icon ending the call. The dial tone filled the kitchen, signaling the end of his reign. Maya picked up her digital audio recorder, a fierce glint in her eye. She looked at the time on her watch and then looked at me. "Now," she whispered, "we call the news director. Tomorrow morning, we bring the cameras." Friday morning broke over the Appalachian foothills, bringing a heavy, humid warmth to the city of Charleston. The affluent subdivision where my parents resided operated on a very specific currency of whispered rumors and manicured discretion. The Homeowners Association enforced strict rules regarding lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and visible trash bins. The unspoken rule, however, was far more rigid. Above all else, you must never air your dirty laundry where the neighbors can see it. The centerpiece of my parents' property was their sprawling, imported, crushed limestone driveway. My father insisted on the expensive gravel as a status symbol. It was a tangible display of his success in the coal logistics industry. That same gravel hosted the theatrical yard sale 48 hours prior. It served as the staging ground for their deception. Now that pristine expanse of limestone was about to become the stage where their entire public facade ground into dust. Evan and I sat parked in his unassuming sedan 3 blocks away, obscured by a line of mature oak trees. We kept the engine off and the windows rolled down, listening to the morning birds. Evan held his smartphone, resting it on the dashboard. The screen displayed a live digital feed from the local news affiliate. We were waiting for the broadcast to begin. A distinct vehicle turned off the main thoroughfare and navigated slowly down my parents' street. It was a crisp, white transit van equipped with a towering satellite antenna and the prominent blue logo of the region's most-watched television news station painted across the side panels. The van did not pull onto the gravel. It parked legally along the street curb, directly adjacent to the property line. Maya stepped out of the passenger side. She no longer looked like the relaxed sister-in-law who had eaten pizza on my living room floor the previous night. She had transformed into the apex predator of local broadcast journalism. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her posture impeccable, her expression set in lines of clinical focus. She held a microphone bearing the station insignia. A cameraman emerged from the rear doors, hoisting a heavy broadcast lens onto his right shoulder. They planted their feet squarely on the public sidewalk, ensuring they did not violate any trespassing ordinances while maintaining a direct, unobstructed view of the front door. The arrival of a news crew in this particular enclave of West Virginia society was the equivalent of setting off a siren. The low hum of the idling van and the sudden appearance of camera equipment drew immediate attention. Blinds shifted in the adjacent colonial home. The widow who lived next door stepped onto her wraparound porch holding a ceramic mug, pretending to inspect her hanging fern baskets. The audience was rapidly assembling. Maya signaled her cameraman. The red recording light illuminated on the front of the lens. She leveled her gaze, bringing the microphone up. "We are coming to you live from a quiet Charleston neighborhood," she stated, her voice projecting a calibrated professional authority that echoed down the quiet street and fed clearly through the speakers of Evan's phone. "Authorities are currently investigating a brazen felony theft involving a highly valuable stolen asset." She did not name my family immediately. She spun the narrative with masterful restraint, painting the exact picture without giving them an early opportunity to deny it. She detailed how a custom $9,000 bridal gown was fenced across county lines to pay off court-ordered debt. She explained the rapid recovery of the stolen goods from a local liquidator. She emphasized the profound betrayal of the theft occurring just 48 hours before the victim's wedding ceremony. Inside the brick walls of the house, my parents were undoubtedly experiencing a frantic awakening. My father started every single morning by drinking black coffee and watching the local news broadcast in his leather recliner. Hearing his own municipality mentioned on the television would have caught his attention. Hearing the specific details of the bridal gown would have triggered a severe adrenaline spike. Realizing the broadcast was happening on his own front lawn would fracture his reality. The heavy oak front door swung open, hitting the exterior brick wall with a dull, resonant thud. My father marched out onto the porch. He wore his crisp golf slacks and a pressed-collared shirt, his daily uniform of affluent authority. His face was flushed a dark mottled plum. For his entire adult life, John controlled his environment through sheer intimidation. He managed shipping logistics by shouting down subordinates, dictating terms, and crushing any opposition through forceful dominance. He possessed no tools for de-escalation. He only knew how to attack. He stormed down the brick walkway, his leather loafers crunching onto the limestone gravel. He raised a hand, pointing a rigid finger at the cameraman. "Get that lens off my property," he barked, his voice echoing down the manicured street, loud enough for the widow next door to hear every syllable. He assumed the news crew would flinch. He operated under the lifelong delusion that his social standing and his bank account granted him immunity from public scrutiny. He believed he could simply order the journalist to leave and the problem would vanish. Maya did not retreat a single inch. She pivoted her body, angling the confrontation perfectly for the broadcast frame. She stepped forward, closing the minimal distance between the public sidewalk and the edge of the limestone gravel. She did not raise her voice to match his anger. She maintained a lethal journalistic courtesy, extending her arm and offering the microphone toward his face. "Sir," she asked, her tone stripped of any intimidation, "do you have a comment regarding the stolen property currently linked to this address?" The question hung in the humid morning air, suspended between the microphone and my father's flushed face. John stopped walking. The forward momentum of his rage collided with the terrifying reality of his situation. He stared at the microphone foam and then looked up at the glowing red recording light on the camera. The micro-expressions crossing his face revealed the internal collapse of his ego. He realized the lens was not just recording a localized argument on his driveway. The lens was broadcasting his face to the television screens of every country club member, every corporate business associate, and every rival executive in the state. If he yelled and threatened the reporter, he became the unhinged, wealthy villain on the midday news. If he denied the allegations, he committed perjury in the court of public opinion, while a formal police report already existed bearing his exact address. He was entirely trapped in a cage constructed of his own vanity and pride. The man who dictated terms to everyone around him found himself stripped of all bargaining power. His jaw clenched, working silently. His chest heaved under his pressed shirt, but no words materialized. He could not fight his way out, and he could not buy his way out. The neighborhood watched in rapt attention. The widow next door set her ceramic mug down on the porch railing, leaning closer to catch the audio. The silence was agonizing, stretching for several seconds of prime television real estate. The illusion of the pristine, untouchable Morris family shattered into countless pieces right there on the imported gravel. He took a half step backward, his authoritative posture crumbling under the weight of the live broadcast. He opened his mouth to formulate a neutral excuse, hoping to salvage a fraction of his dignity. Before he could utter a single syllable, the opportunity vanished. A secondary noise erupted from the interior of the house. A high-pitched, frantic screaming echoed from the foyer, spilling out into the morning air. The front door swung wider, setting the stage for the situation to escalate from a tense standoff into a catastrophic public meltdown. The heavy oak front door swung open, hitting the exterior brick wall with a dull, resonant thud. The sound cracked the tension that had paralyzed my father on the gravel driveway. A high-pitched, frantic screaming spilled out from the foyer into the humid morning air. My younger sister Chloe stormed out onto the porch. She was entirely devoid of any situational awareness. While my father recognized the lethal danger of a live news broadcast, Chloe operated under the delusion that volume equated to victory. She wore a pair of oversized flannel pajama pants and a faded graphic t-shirt. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, pinned haphazardly to the top of her head. For 29 years, Chloe had been shielded from the consequences of her own actions. Whenever she faced accountability, she simply threw a tantrum until my parents intervened and paid the bill. She assumed the presence of a news van was just another interpersonal dispute she could scream her way out of. "You cannot be here," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at the cameraman. "Get off our lawn!" Bridget is just a jealous psycho who hates me. She marched down the brick walkway, her fuzzy slippers slapping against the pavement. She positioned herself right next to my father, attempting to present a united front of righteous indignation. She expected the reporter to cower. She expected my father to launch into a tirade defending her honor. She did not realize she was walking blindly into a perfectly executed journalistic ambush. Maya did not flinch. She did not raise her voice to match Chloe's hysterical pitch. She simply adjusted her stance, shifting the angle of the microphone to capture both my sister and my father in the broadcast frame. "So you admit you personally know the victim?" Maya asked, her voice smooth and lethally calm. "You know Bridget Morris, the woman who filed the grand larceny charges regarding the stolen bridal gown." Chloe stopped screaming. The sudden injection of the phrase grand larceny into the conversation acted like a bucket of ice water. Her mouth hung open slightly. She looked past the camera lens and saw the widow next door leaning over the porch railing. She saw the mailman idling his delivery truck at the end of the cul-de-sac, watching the drama unfold. The realization hit her with visible physical force. The $40 yard sale lie was dead. The neighborhood knew it was a lie, the police knew it was a lie, and the television audience now knew her name was formally attached to a felony investigation. "The dress you fenced in Morgantown yesterday morning?" Maya continued, driving the final nail into the coffin. "To pay off your court-ordered restitution for a hit and run." The blood drained from Chloe's face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. She turned her head, looking at my father, expecting him to fix it, expecting him to pull out his checkbook or shout the reporter down. But John was frozen, his jaw clamped tight, his eyes darting frantically toward the neighboring houses. He offered no rescue. Cornered, panicked, and staring down the barrel of a live broadcast lens, Chloe broke. The Golden Child facade crumbled entirely under the pressure of public exposure. Her self-preservation instincts overrode her familial loyalty in a fraction of a second. She needed a scapegoat, and she needed one immediately. "I did not want to do it," she sobbed hysterically, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. The ultimate plot twist spilled from her lips, echoing across the manicured lawns of the subdivision. "Mom told me to do it. Mom made me sell it." The camera pivoted slightly, catching the movement in the doorway. My mother, Susan, stood frozen on the threshold. She wore a pristine cashmere cardigan and tailored slacks, perfectly dressed for a morning of running errands and preserving her social standing. But her face mirrored the utter collapse of her world. She looked as though she might faint. Her hand gripped the brass door handle so tightly, her knuckles shone white against the dark metal. For my entire life, my mother played the role of the passive peacemaker. She always positioned my father as the strict enforcer, while she played the gentle maternal figure, asking for compromise and forgiveness. She hid behind her country club luncheons and her charity committee meetings, projecting an image of effortless Southern grace. But Chloe's frantic confession stripped away the final layer of the illusion. Susan was not a passive bystander. She was the architect. Susan orchestrated the theft. She knew about the mandatory court deadline. She knew my father could not access the cash without raising red flags on their joint accounts. She was terrified of the social humiliation that would accompany Chloe's arrest. The thought of her country club friends whispering about her daughter sitting in a county jail cell was more agonizing to her than destroying my wedding day. Susan decided my $9,000 gown was acceptable collateral damage. Susan instructed her unemployed daughter to steal the garment, load it into the car, and drive across county lines to fence it to a liquidator. Susan staged the fake yard sale to provide a plausible cover story demanding I absorb the loss, silently to protect the family name. My mother sacrificed my joy, my financial independence, and my dignity solely to save her own country club pride. "Mom told me we needed the cash today," Chloe wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. She said Bridget would understand. She said Bridget always fixes it. The live broadcast captured every single word. The camera lens documented Susan's horrified silence, John's impotent rage, and Chloe's pathetic deflection of guilt. The respectable Morris family had successfully weaponized guilt against me for nearly 3 decades, but their arsenal was completely useless against the unfiltered exposure of the press. Maya did not press them further. She had extracted the confession. She had documented the fallout. She turned toward the camera lens, delivering her sign-off with pristine professionalism. A stunning development here in Charleston, Maya concluded, her voice steady over the sound of Chloe's sobbing. A local family dispute escalating into a grand larceny investigation. We will continue to follow this story as law enforcement secures the stolen property. Back to you in the studio. The red recording light on the camera blinked off. The cameraman lowered the heavy lens from his shoulder. The silence that descended over the driveway was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, born of total devastation. My father stared at my mother, his expression a mixture of shock and profound betrayal. He demanded blind loyalty from his family, and he had just watched his wife and his golden child publicly humiliate him on local television. Maya lowered the microphone and offered them a polite nod. "Thank you for your time," she said, turning on her heel and walking back toward the transit van. Evan and I sat in his sedan 3 blocks away, staring at the digital feed on his smartphone screen. The anchor in the news studio had already transitioned to the weather report. I leaned back against the headrest, exhaling a long, slow breath. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest since I was 17 years old, handing over my diner tips, finally unraveled. The people who had controlled me, who had demanded my constant sacrifice, were broken. Their power was an illusion maintained only by my willingness to keep their secrets. By pulling the curtain back and forcing them into the light, I had dismantled their entire regime. They were no longer the affluent, untouchable elite of Charleston society. They were just desperate individuals turning on each other to avoid accountability. Evan reached across the center console and covered my hand with his. His grip was warm and grounding. "It is over," he said quietly. I looked out the window at the dense canopy of oak trees lining the street. The heavy, humid morning air suddenly felt crisp and clean. "It is not over yet," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "The police have the asset. Now we need to go reclaim the gown. And then I have a wedding to attend." Evan started the engine. The sedan pulled away from the curb, leaving the affluent subdivision and the shattered Morris family in the rearview mirror. The media ambush had executed its purpose flawlessly, but the true payoff, the final satisfying blow to my father's ego, was currently unfolding across town in a location he considered sacred. Friday afternoon arrived with a stifling heat that settled over the Appalachian valleys. Fleeing the catastrophic scene playing out on his own driveway, my father sought refuge in the only sanctuary he had left. He drove his luxury sedan through the winding forested roads of the city toward the exclusive iron gates of the Charleston Country Club. For 30 years, this establishment served as the cornerstone of his identity. It was a fortress of wealth and discretion, where deals regarding coal logistics were finalized over hand-rolled cigars and aged bourbon. John Morris did not just hold a membership at the club. He viewed himself as part of its foundational hierarchy. He demanded deference from the valet staff, the wait staff, and the junior executives who occupied the lower rungs of the social ladder. He navigated the polished marble hallways with an unyielding arrogance, believing his financial portfolio shielded him from the consequences of his actions. He walked into the men's grill, a dark, wood-paneled enclave smelling of expensive leather and roasted coffee. He needed this environment. He needed to be surrounded by peers who respected his authority and reinforced his ego. He needed to convince himself that the chaotic ambush in his subdivision was a localized nightmare, a temporary glitch that he could simply ignore until it faded away. The midday crowd was robust. Local politicians, banking executives, and rival freight operators occupied the deep leather booths. The low murmur of hushed conversations and the crisp clinking of crystal glasses provided a familiar, comforting soundtrack. John offered a tight, controlled nod to a prominent local judge sitting near the window before claiming his usual stool at the far corner of the mahogany bar. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, projecting an aura of relaxed confidence. He signaled the bartender, holding up a single finger. The bartender, a veteran employee who knew the exact preferences of the elite clientele, immediately reached for a top-shelf scotch. John took a deep breath, letting the chilled air conditioning cool the residual flush of anger from his face. He believed he had escaped. He assumed the news crew would pack up their equipment and leave after securing a few seconds of footage. He rationalized that local television stations rarely dedicated significant airtime to domestic property disputes. He underestimated the journalistic instincts of my sister-in-law, and he severely miscalculated the narrative value of his own corruption. 4 large, flat-screen televisions hung suspended above the brass fixtures of the bar. Typically, these monitors displayed financial market updates or professional golf tournaments. However, the digital clock on the wall shifted to noon. The bartender, carrying a fresh glass filled with ice, reached for a remote control and switched the primary television feeds to the midday local news broadcast. John watched the bartender pour the amber liquid into the crystal glass. He did not look up at the screens. He was entirely focused on reclaiming his equilibrium. Then a voice cut through the ambient noise of the grill. It was crisp, professional, and impossible to ignore. It was Maya's voice, projecting cleanly through the overhead speakers. "We are coming to you live from a quiet Charleston neighborhood where authorities are investigating a brazen felony theft." The word felony acted like a magnetic pull. A few patrons sitting at the bar turned their heads toward the screens. The local judge lowered his menu. A rival coal executive paused mid-sentence, his gaze drifting upward. John froze. His hand hovered an inch above the polished mahogany surface. The comforting illusion of safety fractured instantly. He slowly raised his eyes to the television, mounted directly above his head. The screen displayed a high-definition wide-angle shot of his own imported limestone driveway. The prominent brick facade of his house served as the unmistakable backdrop. A lower third graphic appeared bearing the bold text, "Grand Larceny Investigation." The low murmur of conversation inside the men's grill began to thin out. The sound of silverware scraping against porcelain faded. Men who spent their lives navigating corporate espionage and political scandals possessed an acute radar for public destruction. They recognized a social execution when they saw one. The bartender stopped wiping down the counter, his towel resting motionless on the wood. He turned his attention fully to the broadcast. The footage cut from Maya's pristine introduction to the raw, unedited reaction shot. The entire room watched as the heavy oak front door swung open. They watched John Morris, a man who built his entire reputation on maintaining stoic, untouchable control, storm out onto his porch. They saw his face modeled in a dark plum hue of unhinged rage. They listened to the audio of him screaming and pointing a rigid finger at the camera lens, behaving like an erratic, unpredictable liability. The silence inside the country club deepened, turning suffocating and dense. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked directly at my father. They just watched the screen. John sat paralyzed on his bar stool. The heat returned to his face, burning his cheeks. He was trapped in a room full of his peers, forced to witness his own public unraveling. He could not yell at the television. He could not demand the bartender change the channel without drawing even more attention to his humiliation. He was pinned under the collective scrutiny of the most powerful men in the city. The broadcast did not offer him a reprieve. The camera lens shifted, capturing my sister Chloe emerging from the foyer. The patrons of the grill watched a 29-year-old woman wearing fuzzy slippers and pajama pants stumble onto the brick walkway. They heard her shrill voice echoing, accusing me of being a psycho. The executives sitting in the leather booths exchanged quiet, calculating glances. They were observing the chaotic, undisciplined reality of the Morris household. The pristine image of a stable, affluent dynasty evaporated, replaced by the pathetic spectacle of a dysfunctional family actively imploding. Maya delivered her tactical questions with surgical precision. The audio picked up her inquiry about the fenced bridal gown and the court-ordered restitution for a hit and run. John closed his eyes, praying for a commercial break. He prayed the feed would cut back to the news anchor, but the broadcast continued to its fatal conclusion. Cornered and panicking on camera, Chloe broke. The audio feed captured her hysterical sobbing, clear and sharp. "Mom told me to do it. Mom made me sell it." A collective quiet intake of breath rippled through the men's grill. The camera panned, catching Susan standing in the doorway, her face pale and horrified. The narrative was cemented. The wife of a prominent coal logistics CEO orchestrated a felony theft using her own daughter as a pawn to cover up a criminal debt and save face. The red recording light on the broadcast blinked off, and the television feed transitioned back to the news desk. The segment lasted less than 3 minutes. It was an incredibly brief window of time, but it was enough to vaporize a social standing that took 3 decades to construct. The bartender picked up the crystal glass and gently placed it onto a cardboard coaster directly in front of my father. The ice clinked softly against the rim. It was the only sound in his immediate vicinity. John opened his eyes. He looked down at the amber liquid. He slowly turned his head, looking over his shoulder toward the dining area. The local judge, who had offered a polite greeting mere minutes ago, abruptly averted his gaze, suddenly fascinated by his napkin. The rival executive picked up his smartphone, turning his back to the bar. The men who previously sought his advice, who laughed at his jokes and who vied for his business contracts, enacted an immediate, unanimous social quarantine. In the insular world of Appalachian wealth, ruthless business tactics are often respected, but sloppy public criminality broadcasted on the midday news is an unforgivable sin. John was no longer a powerful peer. He was a radioactive liability. Engaging with him meant associating with a family currently under investigation for fencing stolen goods. My father did not reach for the scotch. He realized the drink was not a welcome refreshment. It was a parting gesture. He understood with brutal clarity that his reign was over. He could never walk into this dining room again without feeling the weight of their silent judgment. He could never host a client dinner here. His leverage, his intimidation tactics, and his assumed superiority were stripped away, leaving him entirely exposed. He slowly buttoned his suit jacket. His movements were stiff, devoid of their usual fluid arrogance. He stood up from the bar stool, pulled a $50 bill from his money clip, and dropped it onto the mahogany counter. He turned and walked toward the exit, navigating the long corridor leading to the double oak doors. Not a single person said goodbye. While my father marched toward the valet stand, an exiled king leaving his ruined castle, Evan and I were stepping into the fluorescent lighting of the municipal police precinct. The contrasting trajectories of our afternoon were profound. John was walking away from his legacy in total disgrace. I was walking toward the evidence locker to reclaim the symbol of my liberation. While my father marched toward his vehicle in total disgrace, Evan and I were stepping into the fluorescent lighting of the municipal police precinct. The contrasting trajectories of our afternoon were profound. John was walking away from his legacy, entirely stripped of his power. I was walking toward the evidence locker to reclaim the physical symbol of my liberation. The air inside the station felt heavy, carrying the distinct scent of floor wax and stale coffee. We approached the front desk, giving my name to the dispatcher on duty. She made a quick phone call and instructed us to wait on a hard wooden bench near the entrance. Detective Caldwell appeared a few minutes later, emerging from a secure corridor. He gestured for us to follow him, leading the way into a small, windowless room. We sat at the same scarred metal table where I had filed the initial grand larceny charges earlier that day. Caldwell looked exhausted, rubbing the back of his neck, but he offered a small, grim smile. He explained that the recovery operation went exactly according to our strategy. The patrol officers arrived at the warehouse liquidator in Morgantown shortly after our report was processed. The broker was absolutely terrified, Caldwell explained. The man realized he was not just dealing with a standard domestic dispute over a misplaced item. He understood he was facing a potential federal case involving registered heirloom property transported across county lines. The threat of losing his business license and facing federal trafficking charges completely broke his resolve. He surrendered the garment immediately, without mounting a single argument or attempting to negotiate a finder fee. Caldwell stepped out of the interrogation room and returned moments later, holding a massive, clear plastic bag. Inside the thick, transparent material, the opaque black canvas of my custom, monogrammed garment bag was clearly visible. My name and my wedding date were embroidered in silver thread, shining under the harsh overhead lights. The detective placed it carefully on the metal table. He informed me that standard procedure required an immediate visual inspection to confirm the contents and verify the condition of the recovered asset before he could release it into my custody. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the heavy industrial zipper. I pulled the metal tab down, revealing layers of crisp, acid-free tissue paper. I gently pushed the paper aside, exposing the pristine, heavy silk. It was completely untouched. I ran my fingers over the bodice, tracing the intricate patterns of the vintage Belgian lace. My grandmother taught me the true value of quiet endurance. She grew up in a harsh coal mining camp, surviving extreme poverty and brutal Appalachian winters by relying entirely on her own unbreakable spirit. She never let anyone diminish her worth or dictate her future. She left me that specific lace, knowing I would eventually need a physical reminder of my own inherent value. The fabric was flawless. The pearl embellishments were perfectly intact. My relatives had tried to sell my joy to cover their criminal debts, but they failed. I picked up the pen and signed the release forms, acknowledging the receipt of my property. I draped the heavy garment bag over my arm. The weight of the material felt incredibly grounding, anchoring me to the reality of my victory. We thanked Detective Caldwell for his swift action and walked out of the room, navigating the maze of desks until we reached the glass double doors. We stepped out into the humid evening air. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and dark orange. As we walked across the asphalt toward Evans' parked sedan, my smartphone began to vibrate inside my purse. It was not a single notification. It was a continuous, relentless, mechanical buzzing. The local news segment had finished airing across the regional broadcast networks. The shockwave of Maya's pristine reporting had successfully reached every distant branch of my extended family tree. The aunts, uncles, and cousins who had previously ignored my calls or blindly supported my parents were now in a state of absolute frenzy. I sat in the passenger seat, placing the dress carefully in the back, and pulled the device from my bag. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of incoming text messages and missed call alerts. I unlocked the phone and opened the messaging application. The duality of their panic was fascinating to observe. My relatives were completely divided, caught between their lifelong allegiance to my father and their desperate desire to distance themselves from a highly publicized felony. Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, sent a furious block of text. For decades, Robert relied on John for financial loans and lucrative career introductions. He demanded I drop the charges immediately. He accused me of destroying the Morris family name and warned me that bringing law enforcement into a domestic issue was an unforgivable betrayal. He ordered me to call the police and retract my statement, claiming I was ruining everything over a simple misunderstanding. Aunt Martha took a completely different approach. Martha was obsessed with social appearances and attending high-profile events. Her message was a frantic, backpedaling masterpiece. She claimed she always knew Susan was manipulative and begged me to confirm that her invitation to the wedding ceremony was still valid. She wanted to ensure she remained on the right side of the social divide. She did not care about the emotional trauma I endured. She only cared about securing a seat at the reception and avoiding the fallout. Message after message followed the exact same predictable patterns. They were either trying to intimidate me into silence or groveling to maintain their proximity to the catered event. None of them asked how I was doing. None of them expressed genuine sorrow for the theft or the deception. They only cared about how the situation impacted their own social standing and their relationship with the patriarch. I stared at the glowing screen, watching the notifications pile up. For 29 years, I had exhausted myself trying to decode their passive-aggressive behavior. I spent countless hours crafting careful, polite responses to their demands, always trying to keep the peace and absorb their toxicity. I realized, sitting in the quiet car, that I no longer needed to play their game. I did not owe them an explanation, a debate, or a negotiated compromise. I opened a new group message thread and added every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had contacted me over the last 4 hours. I took a deep breath, centering my thoughts. I intended to type a single mass message, keeping the language stripped of any emotion. I wanted to deliver a clear, definitive boundary that offered zero room for interpretation. My wedding will proceed tomorrow as planned, I typed, my thumbs moving swiftly across the digital keyboard. Due to the recent felony theft orchestrated by my immediate relatives, the guest list is officially adjusted. If you support the actions of Susan and Chloe, or if you believe I should drop the charges, you need to lose my number immediately. I read the text twice. It was concise, brutal, and entirely factual. It offered no apologies and invited no further discussion. I pressed the send icon. The progress bar flashed across the top of the screen, confirming the message had successfully delivered to over 30 different recipients simultaneously. I did not wait for their responses. I knew the message would ignite a massive secondary explosion of gossip and outrage across their private group chats. I did not care. Their opinions were completely irrelevant to my future. I pressed the power button on the side of the device, holding it down until the screen went entirely black. The phone powered off, ending the digital assault and plunging the car into a peaceful silence. I handed the silent rectangular device across the center console to Evan. He took it without asking any questions and placed it inside the glove compartment, snapping the plastic door shut. The isolation was complete, and it felt magnificent. We were permanently cut off from the noise, the manipulation, and the toxic demands of the Morris dynasty. I looked over my shoulder at the heavy black garment bag resting across the back seat. The battle for my dignity was won. The stolen asset was reclaimed. The family facade was destroyed on live television, and the flying monkeys were blocked. But the weekend was far from over. The true emotional challenge lay ahead. I had to wake up the next morning, put on the recovered silk gown, and stand at the altar knowing my side of the aisle would be entirely empty. We carried the recovered garment bag through the front door of our Craftsman home. The evening shadows stretched long across the cedar floorboards. Evan hung the heavy canvas carefully on the back of the bedroom door. I stood in the hallway staring at the silver embroidery catching the dim light. The physical asset was safe, but the psychological warfare initiated by my relatives was far from finished. Since I had locked my primary cell phone inside the glove compartment of the sedan, they lost their direct line of communication. Desperate individuals stripped of their primary target always search for secondary avenues of attack. We walked into the kitchen and Evan's smartphone began to ring. He pulled it from his pocket and frowned at the caller identification screen. It was Chef Thomas, the lead caterer we hired for the reception. Evan answered the call, placing the device on the kitchen island and activating the speaker function. The chef's voice echoed through the room, carrying a distinct tone of professional panic. Mr. Davis, the chef, began speaking rapidly. I just received a very concerning phone call from a woman claiming to be Bridget's cousin. She told my staff the bride suffered a severe mental breakdown this afternoon and the entire wedding was canceled. She demanded we halt all food preparation and refund the deposit to her husband's credit card immediately. I leaned over the quartz countertop. The tactical shift was undeniable. Having failed to bend me to their will, my family decided to deploy a scorched earth policy. If they could not attend the celebration, they intended to dismantle it brick by brick from the outside. They utilized a proxy cousin to execute the sabotage, hoping to catch a busy vendor off guard. In a tight-knit Appalachian community where business is often conducted on a handshake, a frantic phone call from a supposed relative can easily derail an event. I anticipated this exact maneuver. Growing up in a household managed by a man who treated every social interaction as a hostile takeover taught me how to fortify my defenses. 6 months prior, when I initially booked our vendors, I implemented a strict security protocol. Chef Thomas, I said, speaking clearly into the microphone, this is Bridget. The event is proceeding exactly as scheduled. What is the security phrase we established in our contract? I heard the rustling of paper on the other end of the line. The chef let out a long sigh of relief. Blue Ridge Skyline, he answered, reading the password we agreed upon. Any caller attempting to alter, cancel, or modify my contracts without providing that specific phrase is a fraudulent actor, I explained, keeping my tone level and reassuring. Please flag my account. Do not accept any further directives from anyone claiming to be my relative. The chef promised to alert his entire staff and ended the call. Evan shook his head, a mixture of disgust and disbelief crossing his features. They are trying to starve out our guests, he stated, crossing his arms. I nodded. It was a pathetic, desperate strike. I walked over to my home office and opened my laptop to send a quick email to the venue coordinator, reiterating the password protocol. When the operating system loaded, a notification bubble popped up in the corner of the screen. My voicemail application, which synced across all my digital devices, displayed 3 new audio messages. The caller ID attached to the audio files belonged to my mother. Susan realized her frantic texts were going unanswered. She assumed I blocked her number. She transitioned to leaving voice messages, hoping the sheer emotional weight of her words would bypass my boundaries. I clicked the play icon on the first recording. The audio filled the quiet office. Susan's voice was thick with theatrical weeping. She begged me to come back to the house. She pleaded for forgiveness, spinning a frantic narrative where she was merely a victim of circumstance, forced into a terrible position by Chloe's debts. When I did not answer, her tone shifted in the second message. The weeping vanished, replaced by a sharp, accusing edge. She blamed me for the country club humiliation. She told me I possessed a cold, unforgiving heart. The third message contained her ultimate manipulation tactic. Her breathing sounded shallow and erratic on the recording. She claimed her chest felt tight. She whispered that her heart was palpitating and she might need to call an ambulance. She told me if she suffered a heart attack, the blood would be on my hands. I sat in the glow of the computer monitor, listening to her feign a medical emergency. In previous years, that specific message would have sent me rushing out the door, keys in hand, terrified for her well-being. I would have driven back to their limestone driveway, rushed inside, and spent the entire night apologizing for causing her stress, while she sat comfortably on the sofa, sipping tea. Today, the recording elicited nothing but a deep, clinical pity. I recognized the script. When a controller loses their authority, they often play the victim card to force their target into the rescuer role. Threatening self-harm or a sudden medical crisis is the final desperate lever they pull to demand your immediate attention. The gray rock method requires you to observe the behavior without absorbing the intent. I did not engage. I did not type out a response refuting her lies. I did not call the local paramedics to perform a wellness check because I knew she was sitting in perfect health, waiting for her phone to ring. I simply moved the cursor over the audio files and clicked the delete button. The digital trash bin emptied, erasing her voice from my sanctuary. The front doorbell rang, interrupting the silence. I walked back out to the foyer. Evan opened the door to reveal Maya standing on the porch holding 3 large cardboard pizza boxes and a 6-pack of craft soda. The rich scent of melted cheese, baked garlic, and warm dough flooded the entryway, cutting through the lingering tension of the vendor sabotage. Maya stepped inside, kicking her shoes off. I figured nobody felt like cooking, she announced, carrying the boxes toward the living room. We did not bother setting the dining table. We grabbed paper plates and napkins from the kitchen and sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of the living room. We opened the boxes, grabbing slices of hot pepperoni pizza. The contrast between the cold, calculating cruelty of my biological relatives and the warm, easy camaraderie of my chosen family was profound. Evan pulled a large, rolled-up piece of white poster board from the corner of the room. He unrolled it, laying it flat on the floor beside the pizza boxes. It was the master seating chart for the reception. The board featured dozens of small, colorful sticky notes arranged around hand-drawn circles representing the dining tables. We have some editing to do, Evan said, taking a bite of his food. I set my plate down and leaned over the board. I scanned the neat rows of names. I found the head table designated for my parents. I found the adjacent tables reserved for my aunts, uncles, and the cousins who had spent the afternoon sending me threatening text messages. I reached out and peeled the bright yellow sticky note bearing my father's name off the board. I crumpled the small square of paper in my fist and tossed it into the empty trash bin sitting near the sofa. I peeled off my mother's name, then Chloe's. I moved down the row, removing Uncle Robert, Aunt Martha, and Aunt Diane. Maya leaned over and started helping me. We plucked the names off the poster board one by one. The sound of tearing paper filled the room, acting as a therapeutic rhythm. We stripped 30 names from the chart. We erased 30 toxic individuals from the most important day of my life. We were left with a board that looked significantly lighter. We slid the remaining sticky notes forward, consolidating the tables. The people left on the chart were Evan's loyal relatives, my supportive college roommates, and my trusted colleagues from the environmental consulting firm. Every single name remaining represented someone who brought joy, respect, and genuine affection into my life. The sheer absurdity of the last 48 hours finally caught up with me. I looked at the crumpled pile of yellow paper in the trash bin. I thought about my father storming out of his prestigious country club in total disgrace. I thought about my sister standing on the lawn in her fuzzy slippers, confessing to a felony on live television. I thought about the proxy cousin trying to cancel a catered dinner without knowing a simple security password. A soft chuckle escaped my throat. Maya looked up, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She started laughing too. Evan joined in. Within seconds, the three of us were sitting on the floor, surrounded by pizza boxes, laughing until our ribs physically ached. It was not a bitter laugh. It was a pure, joyous release of pressure. The heavy, suffocating expectations I carried for nearly 3 decades dissolved into the warm air of the living room. My relatives had fired their absolute best shots. They stole, they lied, they deployed flying monkeys, and they faked medical emergencies. They threw every weapon in their arsenal at my walls, and the walls did not even dent. The anxiety melted away, replaced by a deep, unshakable calm. The night before a wedding is traditionally supposed to be nerve-wracking. Brides often lose sleep worrying about floral arrangements or weather forecasts. I felt none of that. I finished my slice of pizza, drank my soda, and helped Evan roll the revised seating chart back up. The war was officially over. The battlefield was cleared. I was ready to wake up the next morning, put on my grandmother's lace, and step into a future I built entirely on my own terms. Saturday morning dawned over the Appalachian Mountains, delivering a crisp, pristine clarity to the air. The heavy humidity that choked the city of Charleston the previous day had completely vanished, blown away by a cool, high-altitude breeze. I stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the bridal suite, looking out over the breathtaking expanse of the New River Gorge. The river cut a deep, ancient path through the forested canyon, its surface glinting like crushed diamonds under the morning sun. The venue was a rustic, elegant lodge, constructed of massive timber beams and local river stone. It sat perched perfectly on the rim of the gorge, offering a panoramic view that felt infinite and wild. The sheer natural beauty of the location stood in sharp contrast to the suffocating, manicured subdivision where my parents resided. Here, there were no pristine limestone driveways or country club restrictions. There was only the vast, open sky. I turned away from the window and walked toward the center of the suite. The recovered garment bag hung from a sturdy wooden hook on the wall. Maya and my 2 college roommates stepped forward, carefully unzipping the canvas. They lifted the gown, lifting the heavy silk with profound reverence. I slipped into the dress, feeling the cool, smooth fabric settle against my skin. As Maya secured the intricate pearl buttons running down the back, I closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation of the vintage Belgian lace woven into the bodice. My grandmother had worn this exact lace during her own ceremony decades ago, in a much simpler time before coal logistics and country club memberships defined the Morris family. She understood the true meaning of resilience. Wearing her heirloom was not merely a stylistic choice. It was a physical armor woven with the strength of the only woman in my lineage who possessed a spine. I opened my eyes and looked into the full-length mirror. I did not look like a woman who had just survived a 48-hour psychological war. I did not look like a bride whose family had attempted to sell her joy to a pawnbroker. I looked powerful. I looked unshakable. A gentle knock echoed from the heavy wooden door of the suite. The venue coordinator peeked her head inside, offering a warm, encouraging smile. She informed us that the guests were seated and the string quartet was ready to begin the processional music. I took a deep, steadying breath, lifting the front hem of the heavy silk. Maya offered me a fierce, approving nod, her eyes shining with quiet pride. She stepped out into the hallway, leading the procession. I followed her, navigating the stone corridor until I reached the double doors opening onto the outdoor terrace. The terrace jutted out over the gorge, the wooden deck suspended above the tree line. Rows of white folding chairs faced an archway draped in local wildflowers and green vines. The string quartet, positioned near the edge of the deck, began playing a soft, melodic, classical arrangement. I stepped through the doors, and the crisp mountain wind caught the trailing silk of my gown. The guests rose to their feet, turning their heads to watch my approach. I looked down the aisle. The left side of the seating arrangement, designated for the bride's family, was visually striking. 30 chairs sat conspicuously empty. The ushers had not removed the physical seats due to the last-minute nature of the adjustments. The empty white wood stood in stark contrast to the right side of the aisle, which was completely full with Evan's relatives and our chosen friends. In a traditional ceremony, empty chairs on the bride's side might signify tragedy or profound isolation. Some guests might exchange uncomfortable glances or whisper behind their hands. But as I walked forward, I did not feel a single ounce of pity or shame radiating from the attendees. The air on the terrace was not heavy with absence. It was incredibly light. It felt purified. There were no toxic whispers from aunts critiquing the floral arrangements. There were no passive-aggressive glares from my mother silently judging the catering choices. My father was not standing beside me, clutching my arm, attempting to project an image of patriarchal ownership while harboring a deep, simmering rage. I walked down the aisle entirely alone. My steps were deliberate and measured, matching the tempo of the string quartet. With every step, the gravel crunching beneath the soles of my shoes felt like a victory march. I felt the profound weight of my grandmother's lace and the solid, unyielding strength of my own spine. I did not need an escort. I was not a piece of property being transferred from a father to a husband. I was an independent environmental consultant, a woman who had audited her own corrupt bloodline, outwitted a manipulative syndicate, and secured her own future. I was walking into this partnership as a whole, autonomous human being. Evan stood at the end of the aisle, waiting beneath the floral archway. He wore a sharp, tailored suit, his eyes locked onto mine, reflecting a depth of respect and admiration that took my breath away. He did not look at the empty chairs. He only looked at me. Maya stood to his left, fulfilling her role as my maid of honor. She radiated a protective, fierce loyalty. She had gone to war for me, wielding her journalistic acumen like a broadsword, dismantling the $40 yard sale lie and exposing the felony theft on live television. She was the sister I chose, not the sister I was burdened with. I reached the altar and Evan extended his hand. Our fingers interlocked, his grip warm and grounding. We turned to face the officiant, the breathtaking expanse of the New River Gorge stretching out behind him. The ceremony was incredibly moving, precisely because it was stripped of all familial pretense. The vows we exchanged were not polite, scripted promises designed for a country club audience. They were vows forged in the crucible of absolute truth. When Evan promised to protect and honor me, I knew he possessed the tactical capacity and the emotional fortitude to back those words up. When the officiant pronounced us married, the applause that erupted from the right side of the aisle was deafening. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the lodge and rolled down into the canyon. It was a pure, joyful celebration, untainted by obligation or hidden agendas. We transitioned seamlessly into the reception. The lodge dining room was transformed with warm ambient lighting, simple, elegant centerpieces, and the rich aroma of the catered dinner. The absence of my biological relatives created a vacuum that was instantly filled with genuine affection. Evan's parents, Richard and Helen, approached our sweetheart table shortly after the salads were cleared. Richard, a retired mechanic, and Helen, a pediatric nurse, raised their children in a home defined by unconditional support. They did not maintain an invisible ledger or demand financial sacrifices to prove loyalty. Helen leaned down, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in a tight maternal embrace. "You look absolutely stunning, Bridget," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "We are so incredibly proud to have you in our family." Richard shook Evan's hand and then turned to me, offering a warm, calloused smile. "You handled a very dark storm with incredible grace," he said, his tone carrying a deep, quiet respect. "Do not ever let anyone dim your light." I felt a sudden rush of warmth spread through my chest. The hollow space left behind by my own parents' deception was finally being filled. The evening progressed with an effortless, joyful momentum. There was no manufactured drama. Nobody attempted to manipulate the seating chart or argue with the bartender over drink tabs. The speeches delivered by Maya and Evan's best man were filled with hilarious anecdotes and sincere affection, completely devoid of passive-aggressive jabs or forced nostalgia. When the band began playing, we moved to the wooden dance floor for our first dance. Evan pulled me close, his hand resting firmly on the small of my back. We swayed to the rhythm, the melody washing over the room. I rested my head against his shoulder, looking past him toward the edge of the dining area. The 30 empty chairs were still visible in my peripheral vision. I did not look away. I allowed my gaze to linger on the vacant space. For 29 years, I had exhausted myself trying to earn the right to occupy a seat at their table. I had handed over my diner tips, my peace of mind, and my dignity to subsidize their dysfunction. I realized, dancing in the arms of a man who fought beside me, that the greatest gift my family ever gave me was their absence. Their absence meant I was finally free. I looked back at Evan. His eyes were crinkling at the corners, completely consumed by the joy of the moment. I looked over his shoulder and saw Maya laughing with her brother, holding a glass of champagne. I did not mourn the people who were missing. I celebrated the beautiful, unshakable life we had secured. The reception continued deep into the night, the music echoing across the Appalachian Mountains, signaling the definitive end of the Morris family reign and the brilliant beginning of my own legacy. 1 year later, the dust has finally settled over the Appalachian Mountains. The passage of time often acts as a natural filtering mechanism, separating what is essential from what is toxic. Today I woke up in the home I share with Evan, watching the autumn sunlight filter through the changing leaves of the oak trees in our backyard. The frantic energy that defined the week of our ceremony is a distant memory. Our current reality is built on a foundation of mutual respect, quiet mornings, and unshakable trust. We do not look over our shoulders waiting for the next manufactured crisis. The fallout from the television broadcast dismantled the Morris family hierarchy with ruthless efficiency. My father, John, quickly discovered that Appalachian high society has a very short memory for past success, but a permanent archive for public humiliation. The men he considered his loyal peers at the country club never formally revoked his membership. They simply stopped sitting next to him. They stopped returning his phone calls regarding coal logistics contracts. The silent judgment became an impenetrable wall. Facing the daily reality of his ruined reputation, my father opted for an early retirement. He stepped down from his executive role and retreated into the sprawling house with the imported limestone driveway. That pristine gravel rarely sees any visitor traffic now. He reigns over an empty kingdom, stripped of the audience he craved. My mother, Susan, found herself equally isolated. Without the shield of my father's untouchable status, her country club luncheons and charity committee meetings dried up. The women she spent decades gossiping with recognized her as a social liability. Susan desperately attempted to rewrite the narrative and salvage a connection with me. She utilized every holiday and every minor inconvenience as an excuse to reach out. She drafted long, emotional emails detailing her supposed suffering and asking for reconciliation. I know this because my email server captures them. I created a specific digital filter that routes any correspondence from her address directly into a hidden spam folder. I never read her messages. I do not expend my energy decoding her guilt trips. The boundary I established on my wedding day remains fortified and impermeable. The most profound consequence, however, fell upon the golden child. The local prosecutor assigned to the grand larceny case viewed the televised confession as an irrefutable piece of evidence. Chloe could not scream or cry her way out of a formal indictment. Her defense attorney managed to negotiate a plea deal, reducing the felony charge to a severe misdemeanor to spare her from serving time in a state penitentiary. However, avoiding a jail cell came at a steep price. The presiding judge ordered staggering financial penalties, designed to mirror the value of the stolen bridal gown. Furthermore, the court mandated 500 hours of supervised community service. For a woman who spent her entire 29 years avoiding any form of strenuous effort, the community service requirement was a devastating blow. The municipal authorities did not assign her to a comfortable desk job at an animal shelter or a library. They assigned her to a state highway cleanup crew. This is where the universe delivered a masterpiece of poetic justice. My environmental consulting firm recently secured a highly lucrative contract to manage a sprawling coal reclamation project in the southern district of the state. It is a complex operation requiring meticulous soil analysis and the reintroduction of native Appalachian vegetation to a former strip mine. The perimeter of this specific project borders a long, winding stretch of a rural state highway. Every Tuesday morning, I drive my company truck up the mountain road to conduct routine site inspections. And every Tuesday morning, I see the state-mandated cleanup crew working along the asphalt shoulder. I park my vehicle near the gated entrance of our project site. From the elevated position of the air-conditioned cab, I can oversee the entire operation. My team of engineers and botanists work diligently to heal the damaged earth. And just beyond the chain-link fence, I watch my younger sister perform her penance. Chloe wears a bright, reflective orange safety vest over her clothing. She holds a metal trash grabber in one hand and drags a thick, heavy plastic refuse bag with the other. The Appalachian sun beats down on her as she trudges through the tall weeds lining the drainage ditch. She spears discarded soda cups, fast food wrappers, and cigarette butts. Her posture is slumped, her face flushed, and miserable with exertion. She spends her days picking up garbage mere feet away from a multi-million-dollar environmental operation that I exclusively manage. I do not roll down the window to gloat. I do not honk the horn or attempt to draw her attention. I simply sit in the quiet comfort of my truck, sipping my coffee and reviewing my inspection reports. I watch her face the reality of her own choices. She sold my joy to avoid accountability, and now she pays her debt through literal sweat and manual labor. The scales of justice balance themselves without requiring any further intervention from me. Sometimes acquaintances or distant colleagues learn about the estrangement. They hesitate, their voices dropping into a sympathetic whisper as they ask if I harbor any regrets. They wonder if I feel guilty for tearing my family apart over a wedding dress. They assume the loss of a biological support system must leave a permanent ache. I always smile when I hear that question. It is a genuine, peaceful smile. I did not tear my family apart, I tell them, my voice steady and clear. The people who raised me made a conscious decision. They calculated my worth against a legal debt and decided I was an acceptable sacrifice. They sold their relationship with me for $2,500. They staged a yard sale and lied to my face, expecting me to act as their willing victim. They assumed I would value the illusion of their love more than I valued my own dignity. They were wrong. I did not cause the destruction of the Morris family. I simply refused to be the collateral damage of their corruption. I finalized the transaction that afternoon in the driveway. I collected my receipt from the police precinct, holding the heavy silk gown in my arms. I reclaimed my property, my autonomy, and my future. I walked down the aisle toward a man who respects my strength, and I left the emotional extortion behind me forever. The debt is paid. The ledger is closed. I stepped out of their shadow and walked away into a brilliant, beautiful life. There is a profound, almost terrifying weight to raising a child. As parents, we are the architects of the future, tasked with laying down the emotional and moral foundations upon which our children will build their lives. We all start with the best of intentions, envisioning a home filled with warmth, mutual respect, and unconditional love. But the story of the Morris family, a tale of a stolen wedding dress, a staged yard sale, and a deeply fractured household, serves as a stark, modern American tragedy. It holds up a mirror to the darker, quieter corners of traditional family dynamics, forcing us to ask uncomfortable questions about the legacies we are truly passing down. When we look closely at the collapse of the Morris family, we do not just see a localized dispute over a piece of silk and antique lace. We see the catastrophic culmination of decades of misguided parenting. It is a cautionary tale that peels back the pristine wallpaper of the American dream to reveal the rotting wood underneath. Perhaps the most glaring fracture in the Morris household was the insidious danger of extreme favoritism. In many families, parents unconsciously assign roles to their children. One becomes the responsible caretaker, the other becomes the fragile dependent. John and Susan Morris designated Chloe as their golden child, shielding her from the harsh winds of reality. But in doing so, they did not give her a gift. They handed her a curse. By overprotecting Chloe from her own mistakes, they cultivated a profound laziness and a terrifying lack of accountability. They raised a young woman who believed that rules simply did not apply to her, a belief that ultimately culminated in her committing grand larceny against her own flesh and blood. Conversely, Bridget was thrust into the role of the family's emotional and financial beast of burden. She was treated less like a daughter and more like a mobile ATM, expected to continually sacrifice her own joy, her hard-earned savings, and her peace of mind to subsidize her sister's destructive choices. True family education must be rooted in profound fairness. It requires honoring each child's individual spirit and achievements. A family is meant to be a collective harbor, not an institution where the successful child is perpetually taxed to fund the failures of the favored one. This directly ties into one of the most difficult yet vital aspects of parenting, allowing our children to feel the weight of their own consequences. The parental instinct to protect is fierce, but there is a razor-thin line between supporting a child and enabling their self-destruction. Whenever Chloe faltered, whether it was shoplifting at the local mall or fleeing the scene of a traffic accident, John and Susan opened their wallets to clear her name. They effectively paid the universe to look the other way. But shielding a child from the consequences of their actions deprives them of the essential opportunity to learn to fail and to mature. It teaches them that morality is merely a suggestion, easily bypassed if you have the right connections or enough cash. If we wish to raise responsible, functioning members of the community, we must sometimes possess the agonizing courage to step back. We must let them stand before the judge, pay the fine, or face the disappointed gaze of their peers. Growth happens in the uncomfortable spaces of accountability. Bridget's ultimate salvation in this narrative was not luck, it was her unyielding financial and emotional independence. In American culture, we often praise the self-made individual, but Bridget's journey underscores why professional ethics and hard work are vital tools for survival. Her career as an environmental consultant provided her with more than just a paycheck. It gave her the critical thinking skills, the resources, and the unshakable confidence to defend herself when the people who should have protected her turned against her. We must guide our children to build their own castles, brick by brick, rather than waiting to inherit a room in ours. Independence is the armor that protects them when the world, or even their own family, betrays them. Yet perhaps the most tragic element of the Morris family's downfall was their idolatry of social prestige over genuine human connection. John and Susan sacrificed their daughter's once-in-a-lifetime milestone simply to avoid the embarrassment of their country club peers discovering Chloe's legal troubles. They prioritized the preservation of a hollow, polished image over the beating heart of their own family. How many families sit around mahogany dining tables, smiling perfectly for holiday photographs, while silently bleeding out from the inside? Traditional family values should never be equated with the desperate maintenance of a public facade. True integrity is caring more about the character of the people sitting inside your home than the opinions of the people driving past it. When we place pride above sincerity, we build our homes on sand. As the Morrises learned, when the storm comes, when the truth is finally broadcast into the light, that sand washes away, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Ultimately, this story is a masterclass in the necessity of establishing healthy emotional boundaries. We are often taught that family is a bond written in stone, an obligation that must be endured regardless of the cost to our own mental health. But a shared bloodline does not grant someone a license for psychological manipulation or emotional abuse. Bridget's implementation of the Grey Rock method, the conscious decision to starve her manipulators of the emotional reactions they craved, is a powerful tool for survival. As parents, we must teach our children how to love, but we must also teach them how to fiercely protect their own peace. We must teach them that no is a complete sentence and that it is entirely acceptable to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served, even if that table is set with family silver. Stories like these, the ones that explore the messy, heartbreaking, and triumphant realities of human relationships, are why we gather to share our experiences. They remind us that we are not alone in navigating the complexities of the people we love. If Bridget's journey resonated with you, if it made you pause and reflect on the invisible ledgers kept within your own family tree, please take a moment to subscribe and follow our channel, QT Told Stories. We delve into these deep, transformative narratives every single week, and we would be honored to have you join our community as we continue to explore the intricate tapestry of the human experience. As the dust settles on the Morris family's driveway, we are left to look at our own reflections. Parenting is not about achieving perfection. It is about striving for a quiet, steady authenticity. It is the daily choice between what is easy and what is right. But as we tuck our children in at night or watch them drive away to build lives of their own, a lingering question remains suspended in the quiet air of our homes. Are we laying down the sturdy, honest stones of a foundation that will support them through any storm? Or are we merely painting the walls of a fragile facade, hoping the wind never blows too hard?